Hi, y'all. Today we're going to talk about ILM help, specifically being able to troubleshoot historical issues. So ILM has the ILM Explain, which lets you see into current index situations, specifically that phase action step sequence lets you see where it is in its flow. And if any errors are occurring, that would also show for us. But we potentially have already gotten past the issue and just want to see historically why that issue occurred. So this comes under the ILM history index, which is enabled by default. That pattern is ILM-history-star, which indexes into our system, or sorry, into our cluster as a system index. So it's already there for us. We just need to go look at it in order to use it. So there's been some community feedback, super love that. That generally just says like we might be a little too brief about this index. So here we are, ready to say more. So in a previous blog, I had just highlighted this index that in general, it's either coming under a data stream or index depending on your version, but we generally recommend creating a data view to sit on top. And then there's just a couple of key columns most people like to use to investigate. If push comes to shove and you're really worried and investigating, we also say you can enable trace mode just to get very, very verbose logs. So for our purposes today, for what we're going to demonstrate, I'm going to show you multiple phases. So we're going to have 2 hot nodes, we're going to have 1 cold node, and we're going to have a frozen node. So when we start, again, it's brief. I'll flesh that out. It generally just says go create a data view, so ILM history, -7. And then oh, I don't even need to allow hidden. Awesome. Okay, so it found our at timestamp by default. So we're going to save that data view. Let's set it as default for our purposes. And let's go to discover. Perfect. Okay, so here it knows what I'm going for. So I said I'm interested in the phase. I'm interested in the action. I'm interested in the step. Maybe interested in the failed step. And interested in the error. Okay, so here we can see, maybe going old to new. Here we can see that an index came in. When that index came in, it came into new, which is an implicit phase. Just gets it into the queue, and then it goes into the first one designated in the ILM policy, which is hot, proceeds through the hot steps, and then more indices creating. Let's filter into a good example. I want somebody who rolls over. Okay, so came into hot, went and rolled over. Let's do one more. Pick me somebody who does a lot. Hey there, Delilah. Perfect. Okay, so came into new, went into hot, set priority, unfollow, rollover, had multiple steps under rollover, read only, force merge, goes to cold, right? This is going to be that sequence that we're going to talk about. So that one's currently sitting in cold. So this ILM history and this order of events that we're seeing here is documented under the index lifecycle concepts under phase actions. So the call out here compared to potentially some of the other industry tools is that in order to guarantee against data loss, ILM is going to guarantee that the requested actions proceed sequentially, right? So the reason that that matters compared to other industry tools is, for example, if you say, wait for the snapshot to capture before you delete that data, other tools in the industry that only work off of time logic, potentially, if that first part errors, then they accidentally delete data that you don't have backed up now, which can cause compliance concerns. So for our purposes, the highlight here is if you say, like for the hot phase, do these sequential 3 actions. If it errors on the first one, it's never going to get passed. So it is important when ILM errors occur that we go in and we solve them so that ILM can proceed. Once we solved that one, it would naturally flow to the second one and on to the third, right? So the same spirit applies within actions in a phase across phases. So if you're in hot and you error on something in hot, it's never going to proceed to warm, which ultimately means uh, if you get caught anywhere before delete, that data is not going to delete naturally. We have to go in and we have to fix any of the sequential actions in order to allow ILM to proceed uh, in its sequence so that it can eventually get to that end request without error. To that extent, super helpful and good, right? Because it avoids data loss. ILM's also like being really helpful to us because it's performing actions over time based on logic and or time delay that really minimize the amount of admin time that we need to sync into our cluster. So later on in the video, we're going to talk about just setting up alerts or monitoring for issues, but no news is good news, very thankfully. Okay, so a tabular format of that list, just because I'm a little more of a visual person, generally looks like this. So we talked about how things have to proceed sequentially. The second thing I want to call out is some actions are implicit. So like an ILM migrate action, for example, even if you don't set that action, it is enabled by default. You would have to manually override and disable it. So even if our ILM policy doesn't list some actions, it's important to know which ones are implicit, just so that we have the expectations. The call out here I want to give, for example, if we're going from hot over to warm, is that my data, my shards will be sitting on the hot tier, my ILM phase will trigger to the warm tier, and then my warm tier has to go through set priority, it has to go through unfollow, and it has to go through read only, and it has to go through allocate before it does finally start migrating to the warm tier. So the call out here is just, it is expected potentially that indices can be on a higher temperature data tier for a while so that they can do preconditions before actually moving to the destination temperature tier, right? That part, totally expected, totally fine. The only reason we'd be concerned is if it gets stuck or if it gets blocked. The second thing, very similarly to that, so not implicit actions, but some actions, for example, searchable snapshot, can actually reference actions to occur preceding them. So for example, searchable snapshots are drastically more performant if they are force merged. And so by default, if you use the searchable snapshot action, it's going to enable force merge. So if you did not explicitly say force merge before whenever you induce that searchable snapshot, it's going to request that the force merge actually happens before it becomes a searchable snapshot. So an example of this, like let's say our data is on hot and it's going to go straight to frozen as a searchable snapshot. The index will say that the ILM phase is now frozen, but the data is going to merge on hot first before it moves over to frozen. So that's the second thing just to have a heads up on, right? Like, again, just calling out for people that there can be implicit actions. And secondly, some of those steps try to guarantee their preconditions, which again is very helpful for the safety of our cluster. Cool. Okay. For today, like all the other ILM examples we've been doing, Elasticsearch recommends using data streams. I recommend using data streams. We want it to break so that I can show you things. So we're going to use the older version where we're just setting up an index with an alias. So in our console, we're going to go create this ILM policy. So this ILM policy is going to discuss 10 separate actions just so that we have sufficient logs to show y'all. So set priority, rollover, read only, force merge, and separately set priority, searchable snapshot, and then allocate, searchable snapshot under frozen, and then delete is going to do wait for snapshot and delete. So we talked about how If the frozen said to force merge, it would force merge on where the shards were prior, which for us would be cold. Cold also says force merge, which potentially would happen on the tier prior, which for us would be hot. So at this point, our ILM policy does say to force merge 3 separate times. ILM has your back. The second and third time is just going to be a no op. So it'll check to confirm, make sure it's good, and then it'll proceed without issue. Separately, though, there are some actions, for example, searchable snapshot again, that searchable snapshot can be induced on fully mounted style and partially mounted style. So a fully mounted happens on the hot and cold nodes, and a partial mount happens on the frozen nodes. So a fully mounted can only happen once. So between hot and cold, you can choose which of those two you want it to happen on. But if, for example, in my ILM policy, I tried to put it in both places, it would err on me that it can only set it in one of the 2 places and I have to choose between them. So again, ILM has your back. If it's allowed and it looks like it might be a duplicate, you can assume it's going to be performing a no-op. If you try and it errors on you, that's just a safety barrier. So that part's fine. Okay, so following that doc, in order to set up some examples for us, I'm going to do an index template, and right now it's going to have a rollover alias of irmao, and it's going to connect to that ILM policy. So let us bootstrap that initial index so that we can write to it, and now we're going to just create some docs. So my rollover is after 2 docs are created, so I'm going to have 3 docs by default. So we have 3 docs ingested. So yeah, I already have my second index, which is awesome. So we can see that first one is in hot force merge. So this is live how all of us would be going through, looking, checking, making sure everything's okay. Let's hit explain again, because it should be going pretty fast. Disclaimer as always, during tests, I've overrode that polling interval to 10 seconds. Again, you can do it for tests. You don't want to leave that live in your production. Okay, so we're to hot complete, and the other one is check rollover ready. So let's go look. Not last 3 hours. I just wanted to show you guys. Oh, last 15 minutes. Perfect. Okay, so we see that irmao came in as new, automatically went into my hot tier, set priority, unfollow, rollover. All of this is proceeding exactly as we talked about. So it gets to attempt rollover, and we can see here it created the second index just as we asked it to, which immediately started going through that same sequence. So this is looking golden and exactly as we like. So at some point right here, I think it comes back to index 1 after it confirmed that it rolled over as desired. And now it's saying that it's going to force merge just as we asked, and now it's in hot complete. So I think I set hot to like a really low time. Yeah, 2 minutes. So that might be progressing here pretty soon. Awesome. So that's working as we hope. Let's go break it just so we can see an alternative of what that would look like. So in a previous video, we ended up removing this ILM rollover alias just so that we could guarantee an ILM error. We're going to do that same thing today. So we're just going to create more docs again. They all created successfully. Now we have 6. So now we have index 1 and index 2, and we would expect index 3. So here we see this is going into searchable snapshot. That's awesome. Index 2 does say read only, which is past which is past the rollover. And so this index 3 is sitting in ILM check rollover. That's awesome. Check rollover ready. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you. I have to make sure not to hit submit again. So is auto retryable error true and failed step retry count 1? You'll notice right now it's not actually reporting what the error is. It's just telling us it had an error and maybe it can recover from it. So this is the perfect time to, what's newest? Sort new to old? To use the ILM history. because it's telling us like it went to check rollover ready, and when it tried to run that, it immediately ran into the rollover alias is empty or not defined. So that is exactly why we would use the ILM history. For our purposes, let's go unbreak it by putting that rollover alias on it. And now somewhere in there, it will recognize that I fixed it. Oh, it would recognize it if I filled in my placeholder. Okay, now I fixed it. Yay! So I'm just hitting resubmit on this because I'm not patient. That's about why. To be fair, I now realize we could also run retry, put ILM, I think it's post, retry. Oh, it already fixed. Cool. It did not fix. Has encountered, not encountered an error. ILM split. Oh, sorry. I just realized I don't know how many docs I have. It maybe thinks that there wasn't enough docs to roll over. Let me see. Ooh, and it rolled over. Perfect. Okay, coming over to Discover, we can see check rollover ready. Yeah, let's just leave that rolling. Perfect. Hey. So index number 2 already made it over to frozen. That's awesome. Perfect. So coming back over here, so at this point we have uh, our ILM sitting in a pretty good spot. I'm just going to reset that polling interval. So at this point, we know how to troubleshoot ILM live from previous videos. We now know how to troubleshoot ILM via its history. Awesome. And now we want to talk about like, hey, like I need to magically know when to check that index? And the answer is no, right? That would be sad. So historically, the answer was that either under the ILM history index, you would come filter for something is set to an error, and then either based on the amount or even if it flagged once, you would set up a monitoring alert. The alternative to that is under Elasticsearch monitoring, or more generally under Elastic Cloud monitoring, you could set up a more generic error. So again, these are going to generally just be variations of the same thing, right? But here we could say, ooh, get rid of that. Oh, what did I click? I want the message. Here we could say, this is the particular information, and we could figure out our filter. I think it's log level. No, logger. Oh, okay. Okay. So we could generically say something in the lifecycle runner experience an error. So from this, historically, what we had said is that under stack management, you could come into rules and we could say, I want to create a rule. And it's either, I don't think it's stack monitoring. I think I need a manual one. I'm doing Elasticsearch query, ILM history. ILM's erroring. I'm gonna do Lucene because I like Lucene. KQL is awesome too. Um, so when the count over all documents is above, we'll say 10. For our example, I don't necessarily care. So, oh, that one. You can also, again, ILM history, just showing y'all. So create a rule. what we really care about is that action. So I just want to show you that, for example, you could create a PagerDuty, you could create a Slack notification, you could log, right? Like all the different things. But, right, like our on-calls want to be notified. They don't want to have to poll for issues. So rules, definitely historically how we recommended it. Still a generally valid response. What Elastic Cloud does for us is under that health menu, it is pulling the Elasticsearch Health API, so it's also willing and able to notify you if ILM is experiencing issues. So some folks, in order to guarantee for their reports how things are doing, will use this Health API, particularly if we go look under ILM. It's going to tell us if ILM is running, if there's stagnant indices. So we talked earlier about how ILM is performing asynchronous tasks. And so when it's waiting for those, some of those aren't going to report as errors. They're just going to report as delays. So ILM will notify you both, or sorry, the health ILM report will notify you both if there's explicit errors. And also secondly, if there aren't errors, it's just taking longer than it would have expected. So that's awesome. The ILM Health at this point in time does not currently notify you. If you do want it to notify you, I recommend filing an enhancement request against your subscription for this Kibana issue, which just generally says, like, we have some pretty good monitoring in multiple places, and we just also want the Health API to actually notify people. So to that extent, we have now fully demonstrated that the ILM history is able to show historical issues so that they can be troubleshot. And then for anything that is a current and ongoing issue, we can use our previous method of ILM explain and that whole troubleshooting ILM health setup in order to know how to resolve it. So thanks all for hanging out with me. I hope that helps clarify the ILM history. Bye all.